That folder hits the desk, heavy, real heavy. And your attorney, this person who's seen everything, defended everyone, sat through depositions that would make your skin crawl. They stop, mid-sentence, mid-breath, and they look up at you with this expression you've never seen on a legal professional's face before. It's not shock, it's not surprise, it's recognition, and maybe, just maybe, a little bit of fear, but not fear of what's coming for you, fear of what's coming for them. Because here's what just happened in that moment. Here's what you don't see when you're sitting there, trying to stay calm, trying to keep your hands from shaking as you watch someone flip through the documentation of the worst chapter of your life. That lawyer just realized they're not representing a victim. They're representing a weapon. A loaded, aimed, legally documented weapon that's been sitting in silence, gathering evidence, building a case so airtight that opposing counsel is going to need a therapist just to process the settlement conversation. And, you know what the wildest part is? You didn't even know you were doing it. Not really, not at first. While they were telling everyone you were crazy, you were screenshotting. While they were painting you as the unstable one, the emotional one, the one who just couldn't let things go, you were creating a digital paper trail that would make a forensic accountant weep with joy. Every text message, every email, every voicemail that came at 2 a.m, slurring and threatening, every witness to every public humiliation, every medical record from every panic attack, every therapy session, every ER visit where you said you fell, but the pattern of injuries tells a completely different story. You kept receipts, not because you're petty, but because somewhere deep in the part of you that refused to die, no matter how hard they tried to kill it, you knew. You knew this moment was coming. See, this is what people don't understand about survivors who document everything. The abuser thinks you're doing it out of paranoia, out of that same instability they've been telling everyone about. But your lawyer knows different. Your lawyer just saw 3 years of metadata, phone records that corroborate your timeline down to the minute, witnesses you never even mentioned until the deposition list, therapy notes that predicted their behavior patterns 6 months before they escalated, a spreadsheet, and yeah, you made a spreadsheet, that cross-references dates, incidents, lies they told, and proof of those lies. That's not paranoia. That's preparation. That's strategic patience mistaken for weakness by someone who thought you were too broken to fight back. And now their attorney is reading the evidence summary. Right now. As you're listening to this, they're sitting in some conference room with wood paneling and expensive coffee. And they're realizing that every single thing their client told them is about to be proven false. Not disputed, not he said, she said. Proven, with timestamps, with third-party corroboration, with a level of documentation that suggests you weren't just surviving, you were building a prosecution case, while they thought you were just trying to make it through the day. The thing about people who've never been through it is they don't understand the dual consciousness required to survive abuse while simultaneously documenting it. It's like living in 2 realities at once. In one reality, you're trying to de-escalate, trying to keep the peace, trying to make yourself smaller, so maybe, just maybe, tonight won't be the night that everything explodes. But in the other reality, the quiet one that runs underneath like code beneath a program, you're watching, you're noting. You're remembering that this is the 4th time they've used that exact phrase, the 3rd time they've blamed you for something you have proof you didn't do, the 2nd time this month they've violated the protection order that they claimed you were being dramatic about needing. Most people can't hold both those realities in their head at the same time. It would break them. But you? You didn't just hold them. You used one to survive the present while building evidence for the future. That takes a kind of mental compartmentalization that, honestly, most people don't possess. It takes the ability to be present in your own trauma while simultaneously being a witness to it, to feel everything while also cataloging everything. And that's exactly what scares your attorney's opponent right now. Because here's what just became clear to everyone in that legal office. They're not defending someone who was misunderstood. They're not defending someone caught up in a complicated relationship. They're defending someone who is about to be exposed in legal documents that will be part of public record, as exactly what you've been saying they were all along. And all the people who doubted you, who said you were exaggerating, who suggested maybe you were partly to blame, who whispered that you seemed fine, so how bad could it really have been? They're about to have a very uncomfortable realization. You weren't exaggerating. If anything, you were understating it. See, the abuser's greatest weapon has always been your credibility. If they can make people question whether you're reliable, whether you're stable, whether maybe you're just a little too sensitive or a little too dramatic, then your truth doesn't matter. But documentation doesn't have credibility problems. Metadata doesn't get emotional. Phone records don't have unreliable memories. And when you have 2 years of text messages showing a clear pattern of escalation, control, gaslighting, and threats, followed by their public statements calling you a liar, well, that's not a credibility issue anymore. That's a prosecutorial slam dunk. And your lawyer knows this. That's why they paused. That's why they took their glasses off and rubbed their face and let out this long, slow breath before looking at you with something that might have been admiration mixed with professional excitement. Because lawyers live for cases like this. Cases where the evidence is so overwhelming that the other side can't spin it, can't minimize it, can't make it go away with the right wording in a settlement agreement. They live for cases where justice isn't just possible, it's inevitable. But here's the deeper thing that just happened in that moment. Here's the thing that matters even more than the legal victory that's coming. That lawyer's reaction just validated everything you've been carrying in silence. Every moment you questioned yourself. Every time you wondered if you were remembering it right. Every instance where someone suggested maybe you were being too harsh, maybe you should give them another chance, maybe it wasn't really that bad. That pause, that, oh God, that's not about the case. That's about recognition. That's a legal professional, someone trained to be skeptical, someone who's heard every story and learned to look for inconsistencies, saying, this happened, this was real. This was worse than you probably even told people, and you have the proof. Do you understand what that means? After months or years of being told you're remembering wrong, exaggerating, being too sensitive, not understanding their perspective, after all that gaslighting that made you question your own reality, a neutral third party with no emotional investment just looked at the objective evidence and confirmed, you've been telling the truth. You've been telling the truth this whole time. That's not just legal validation, that's existential validation. And the person who tried to make you question your own sanity is about to have that same evidence presented to a judge, to their family, to their employer if the case requires it, to everyone who believed their version of events. The same people they convinced you were overreacting to. They're about to see exactly what you were reacting to in black and white, time-stamped and corroborated. See, this is where the psychology gets interesting. Because abusers rely on isolation. They rely on their victim being too ashamed to tell people the full story, too embarrassed to show the texts, too afraid of being judged for putting up with it. They rely on you protecting their reputation while they destroy yours, and in doing that, they create this ecosystem where the truth stays hidden and they stay protected. But you didn't just tell people, you documented. You created an evidence chain that doesn't rely on people believing your word against theirs. And that changes everything. Because now it doesn't matter who they told what version of events. It doesn't matter who they convinced that you were the problem. Evidence doesn't care about charm. Documentation doesn't fall for manipulation. The truth, when properly preserved and presented, doesn't need to be believed. It simply is. And that's what your lawyer is looking at right now. Not a story, not an allegation. An irrefutable timeline of abuse that's about to become a legal record. You know what the opposing attorney is doing right this second? They're having a very different conversation with their client. They're explaining that the case they thought they had, the difficult divorce, the custody dispute with an unstable ex, the he said/she said with no real evidence, that case doesn't exist, never existed. What exists instead is a documentation trail that proves every allegation, contradicts every defense, and makes their client look exactly as bad as they actually are. And that attorney has a choice now. They can try to fight this, drag it out, hope you run out of money or emotional energy, try to find some technicality or procedural delay. But every lawyer knows that fighting the unwinnable case just makes it worse. It gives you more opportunities to present evidence, more depositions where their client's lies compound, more discovery where additional proof surfaces, more time for the judge to see the pattern. Or they can advise settlement. Quick, quiet, favorable to you because the alternative is a trial that will be the legal equivalent of a public execution. And here's the thing about that choice. It doesn't matter which one they pick. You've already won. The victory isn't in the courtroom. The victory happened the first time you decided to screenshot instead of just crying. The first time you forwarded an abusive email to a private folder instead of just deleting it in shame. The first time you wrote down what happened while the details were fresh, even though writing it made you relive it. Every single one of those moments was an act of resistance. Every piece of documentation was a refusal to let them rewrite history. Every time-stamped record was you saying, "No, this happened, and I will not pretend it didn't." That's the power move they never saw coming. They thought silence meant defeat. They thought your lack of public confrontation meant you were letting it go. They mistook strategic documentation for passive acceptance. And now the silence is about to become the loudest statement anyone's ever heard. Because here's what happens next. That evidence gets organized into a case file. That case file gets submitted to the court. Opposing counsel gets their copy and has to review it with their client, who's going to have to sit there while their lawyer reads back their own words, their own threats, their own contradictions. And there's going to be this moment, this beautiful, terrible, justice-filled moment, where the abuser realizes that all the lies they told, all the people they manipulated, all the reputation destruction they achieved against you means nothing in the face of documented truth. They can't charm a phone record. They can't gaslight a metadata timestamp. They can't manipulate a witness who's under oath and has no reason to lie for either side. The mask doesn't just slip in that moment. It gets ripped off and entered into evidence. And you know what? The people who doubted you are going to have their own reckoning. The ones who suggested you should just move on. The ones who said, "It takes two," or "There are two sides to every story." The ones who maintained relationships with your abuser because, well, they seemed so nice, and you seemed so angry. When the evidence becomes public record, or even when enough of it leaks through the social circles, because it always does, those people are going to have to sit with the fact that they doubted you. They're going to have to reconcile the person they thought they knew with the person the evidence reveals. And some of them, the good ones, the ones who genuinely didn't know, they're going to apologize. They're going to feel sick about the times they suggested you were overreacting. But others are going to double down, going to find reasons why the evidence doesn't mean what it clearly means, going to suggest maybe you provoked it, maybe you're leaving something out, maybe it's been taken out of context, and you're going to learn something valuable about those people. They're not interested in truth. They're interested in comfort. And your truth makes them uncomfortable because it means they were wrong. They enabled abuse. They sided with someone who hurt you. Let them sit with that discomfort. Let them twist themselves into logical pretzels trying to explain away time-stamped evidence. Let them reveal who they really are by how they react to proof. Because you're not doing this for them. You're not even really doing this to the abuser. Though the legal consequences are going to be a side benefit, you're doing this for you, for the part of you that kept meticulous records because you knew, even when you didn't consciously know, that documentation was survival. That proof was power. That truth, properly preserved, would eventually speak louder than any lie. And that lawyer sitting across from you, the one who just whispered, "Oh God, they messed with the wrong one." They get it. They understand what they're looking at isn't just a case file. It's a masterclass in strategic survival. It's evidence that you weren't just enduring abuse. You were preparing for the aftermath. That while you were being told you were too weak to leave, too broken to fight, too damaged to be believed, you were quietly, methodically, building the legal equivalent of a nuclear option. You were transforming trauma into testimony, pain into evidence, silence into the most damning statement of all. And now comes the part the abuser never anticipated. See, they thought if they broke you enough, scared you enough, isolated you enough, you'd never fight back. They thought the person they were abusing was the final version of you. They thought they'd successfully turned you into someone too afraid, too traumatized, too dependent to ever challenge them. They didn't realize they were creating their own worst nightmare, because every act of abuse made you more determined to document. Every lie made you more careful to preserve evidence. Every time they told others you were crazy, you became more committed to proving, with receipts, that you were the sanest person in the room. They were training you, without even knowing it, to become the one thing they couldn't defend against. A credible witness with corroborating evidence. And, there's something almost poetic about that, isn't there? The way they created their own downfall. Every manipulative tactic they used gave you more to document. Every smear campaign made you more systematic about preserving your reputation through proof. Every time they isolated you from potential allies, you focused more on building an evidence file that wouldn't require allies, just a lawyer competent enough to read it. They weaponized your truth by calling you a liar. So you weaponized their lies with documentation. See, this is what people miss about survivors who keep evidence. They think it's about revenge, about getting back at the abuser. And sure, maybe there's an element of justice seeking in it. But the real reason you documented everything: protection, insurance, the knowledge that if this ever escalated to a point where you needed to prove what was happening, you could. If you ever needed to explain to a judge why you needed a protection order, or why you should have custody, or why this person should be held accountable, you'd have more than your word. You'd have their words, time-stamped, preserved, undeniable. That's not revenge. That's survival insurance. That's understanding that in a system that too often questions victims, that demands proof of abuse when abusers are skilled at hiding it, that treats women as unreliable narrators of their own lives, documentation is the difference between being believed and being dismissed. And you refused to be dismissed. So while they were confident in their ability to lie their way out of anything, you were building a case file that would make lying impossible. While they were charming new people with their version of events, you were organizing evidence that would prove which version was real. While they were convinced you were too broken to threaten them, you were becoming the most dangerous thing an abuser can face. A documented witness with nothing left to lose. And that moment when your lawyer paused, that's when they realized all of this. That's when it clicked for them that this isn't a typical case. This is someone who turned their survival into a legal strategy. Someone who transformed their powerlessness into the most powerful thing in a courtroom. Evidence that speaks for itself. Your attorney just realized they're going to win. Not through legal maneuvering or clever arguments, though they'll do those things, but because the evidence is so overwhelming that the outcome is predetermined. The only question is how badly the other side loses. And here's where it gets really interesting. Because that lawyer across from you, they've seen plenty of abuse cases. They know the patterns. They know how abusers operate, how they manipulate systems, how they use their charm and your trauma against you. They've represented plenty of people who were telling the truth but couldn't prove it, who had the right story but the wrong evidence, who were credible as hell but up against someone more credible. But you removed credibility from the equation entirely. You made this about facts. And facts don't care who's more charming or who tells a better story. Facts just are. That's what made them pause. The realization that they've got a client who understood something most people never figure out. In a system designed to doubt victims, proof is power. And you gathered power the same way you survived everything else. Methodically, quietly, with a kind of strategic patience that looks like weakness until you see the full picture. They thought you were just surviving. You were preparing for war. And the war is here. But it's not the kind of war they can win, because they brought manipulation to a fight where you brought documentation. They brought lies to a courtroom that demands evidence. They brought their charm to a judge who's going to read transcripts, not listen to charisma. They're fighting the wrong battle, and they don't even know it yet. But their lawyer does. That's why the person representing them is probably, right now, trying to figure out how to convince their client to settle before this gets ugly. Before depositions happen and they have to explain under oath why their version of events contradicts phone records, witness statements, and their own prior statements. Before a judge sees the pattern, before it becomes public record that they're not the victim of a vindictive ex, they're the perpetrator of documented abuse. The lawyer knows that trials are risky. But this isn't risky. This is certain. The only risk is how much damage happens before the inevitable conclusion. And your lawyer is probably already thinking about what comes after, about how this case could set precedents, about how your level of documentation could be a model for other survivors, about how the evidence you gathered could help not just you, but everyone who comes after you in similar situations. Because here's what you did that matters beyond your case. You proved that victims aren't helpless. That surviving abuse doesn't mean you can't also build a case against your abuser. That being traumatized doesn't make you disorganized or unreliable. Sometimes it makes you more meticulous, more careful, more determined to create a record that can't be disputed. You turned your hypervigilance into a legal asset. You transformed your trauma responses into documentation strategies. You made your survival your strongest evidence. And, that's what's dangerous about you now. Not dangerous in the way they tried to paint you. Unstable, emotional, vindictive. Dangerous in the way that threatens every abuser who thinks they can get away with it because their victim is too scared or too broken or too isolated to fight back effectively. You're proof that's not true. You're proof that documentation is possible even in the middle of trauma. That building a case is possible even when you're barely surviving. That justice is possible even when the system is stacked against you. If you're smart enough, strategic enough, determined enough to create evidence that the system can't ignore. Every abuser who hears about your case is going to feel a chill, because you're their nightmare scenario. The victim who didn't just leave, who left with receipts. The survivor who didn't just tell their story, who brought proof. The person they thought they'd destroyed, who instead destroyed their ability to lie about what they did. And every survivor who hears about your case is going to feel something else. Hope. Because you proved it's possible. You proved that even in the darkest moments, even when you're being told you're crazy, even when everyone believes them over you, you can build a foundation of truth that will eventually speak louder than any lie. That pause from your lawyer wasn't just recognition. It was respect. It was a legal professional, someone who's seen the worst of humanity and the failures of the justice system, looking at someone who gamed that system in exactly the right way, who understood that the law requires evidence and spent years gathering it, who knew that courts respond to documentation and became a documentation machine while fighting for their life. You played the long game. And the long game is about to pay off in ways that will echo beyond this courtroom, beyond this case, beyond this chapter of your life. Because when this is over, and it will be over, and you will win, and they will lose in ways they can't even imagine yet, you're going to walk out of that courtroom as someone who proved that survival can look like strategy, that healing can include justice, that peace doesn't have to mean letting someone get away with hurting you. You're going to walk out knowing that you didn't just survive. You documented your survival so thoroughly that your abuser couldn't escape it, couldn't lie about it, couldn't make it disappear. You turned your pain into evidence, your trauma into testimony, your silence into the statement that ended them. And that lawyer, the one who paused and whispered, "Oh God," they just became a witness to something they'll tell other attorneys about. The case where the victim came so prepared that it wasn't even a fight. The case where the evidence was so overwhelming that justice wasn't a hope, it was a guarantee. They'll tell other lawyers about you, and those lawyers will tell their clients who are scared to come forward because they don't think they have enough proof. And those clients will realize that maybe they do. Maybe they've been documenting all along without even realizing it. Maybe their screenshots matter. Maybe their journal entries are evidence. Maybe their therapy notes are corroboration. Maybe they can do what you did. See, that's the ripple effect of your preparation. That's why this matters beyond your personal justice. You're not just winning your case, you're changing what other survivors believe is possible. You're proving that documentation works, that strategic patience works, that turning survival into evidence works. You're making every abuser a little less confident that they can get away with it. And you're making every survivor a little more confident that they can prove what happened to them. That's power. Real power. Not the power to destroy, though you're about to legally destroy someone who tried to destroy you. But the power to transform, to take the worst thing that ever happened to you and turn it into the thing that makes sure it never happens to you again, and maybe helps ensure it doesn't happen to someone else. And when that lawyer looked up at you with that expression, with that whispered, "Oh God, they messed with the wrong one," they were seeing all of that. They were seeing someone who didn't just survive abuse, someone who survived it while simultaneously building the legal case that would end it, someone who was fighting for their life while documenting the fight, someone who was being told they were crazy while creating evidence of their sanity. They were seeing someone who understood that the truth matters, but proof matters more. That being right isn't enough if you can't demonstrate it. That justice requires evidence, and if the system won't gather it for you, you gather it yourself. You became your own advocate, your own investigator, your own prosecutor, and now you've handed a legal professional everything they need to finish what you started. That's why they paused, because they just became the weapon you've been building for years, and they know exactly how to use it. So yeah, they messed with the wrong one. They thought they were abusing someone who would stay silent, stay scared, stay stuck. They thought they were dealing with someone too traumatized to fight back effectively. They thought wrong. They were actually creating someone who would document every lie, preserve every threat, corroborate every pattern, and build a legal case so airtight that their own lawyer would advise them to settle before it destroys them completely. They were creating you, the documented witness, the prepared survivor, the person who turned pain into power and trauma into testimony. And now they get to live with the consequences of underestimating someone they should have never hurt in the first place. That lawyer's pause, that's the sound of your victory beginning. That whispered, "Oh God," that's the moment the universe acknowledged what you've known all along. You were telling the truth, and now you can prove it. Checkmate.